Week 35. Overview. Powerful Men and Inspiring Women. We're coming to the close of many things this week. For some, it's just the end of the unit, but for many, it's the end of your school year. We're wrapping up our study of the 19th century with the 20th century just around the corner. We've reached the era of Teddy Roosevelt, a war hero in the 19th century and a president in the 20th. Rhetoric students cover two great powers at the center of Europe this week, Austria-Hungary and the recently unified German Empire. They have to understand what's happening there to make sense of what's coming at the start of Year 4, World War I. Grammar students get to learn about two remarkable women of this era, Helen Keller and Marie Curie. In addition, upper grammar and dialectic students learn a little of the fascinating history of Hawaii this week. We'll look into American imperialism for these last 2 weeks of the year. American imperialism brings us to Teddy Roosevelt, who became President of the United States in 1901. Roosevelt was a key player in the drama of the Spanish-American War, which we'll study next week. Few of America's larger-than-life figures are more fascinating than Teddy Roosevelt. You don't have to agree with his politics to love this man. He was a man's man, a fabulous father, and a dynamic president. But he didn't start that way. As a boy, Roosevelt was frail, often struggling just to breathe. The doctors couldn't cure him. Theodore Roosevelt Sr. told his son that man was not intended to be an oyster. He urged Teddy to make his body strong. The son took his father's advice to heart and began an intense program of exercise. Though he battled against ill health for the rest of his life, that clash between his childhood sickness and his indomitable will produced a man determined to live life to its fullest. As a child, he wasn't merely weak. He was also timid. He was afraid of the preacher at church. He thought there was a werewolf at the foot of his bed. One day he read a book that said, "If you act like you aren't afraid, you won't be afraid." His life after that looked like the very model of courage. Roosevelt applied this new idea to happiness. If he could always act as if he were happy, he thought, then he would be happy. For Roosevelt, being happy meant being busy, and he stayed busy. Roosevelt became a veritable human dynamo. Roosevelt loved nature. As a young child, he filled notebooks with his observations. His hobby was often the subject of his conversation, and his love for animals and nature only grew stronger as he got older. As president, he got a chance to care for wildlife on the grandest scale. Teddy Roosevelt isn't the only remarkable person your kids are studying this week. Children at the grammar level get to learn about Helen Keller, who was stricken blind and deaf by scarlet fever when she was just 19 months old. She was cut off from all communication with the human race until 20-year-old Annie Sullivan came to Alabama to teach her. Helen eventually learned to read, speak, and write her own books. Hers is a remarkable human drama that's inspired generations to be the best they can with whatever God has given them. If you don't already know her story, try reading a grammar level book about her to your children. Another remarkable woman of this time was Marie Curie, born Maria Skłodowska in Warsaw, which is now the capital of Poland, but it was a Russian possession back then. At 24, Marie moved to Paris, where she eventually became a citizen of France. Studying by day and tutoring at night, she worked herself through the Sorbonne, graduating with a degree in physics, and then got another degree in math. A young scientist who shared her fascination with magnetism soon attracted her attention. She married Pierre Curie in 1895. The next year, another scientist discovered something odd about uranium. It glowed. Marie used a device her husband had invented to measure extremely weak electrical currents. She was amazed to discover that uranium did something odd to the air around it. It turned air into an electrical conductor. Marie's careful, systematic measurements revealed another strange fact. The ore that produced uranium radiated even more strongly than uranium itself. That meant there must be something else in there with it, something new. Together with her husband, she discovered a new element, which they named polonium, for her partitioned homeland. 5 months later, they discovered another new element, radium. Marie Curie won 2 Nobel Prizes for her work, one in chemistry and the other in physics. I'd love to say that she and Pierre lived happily ever after, but that isn't what happens to people who process tons of uranium ore with their bare hands. She died in 1934 from the side effects of radiation. To this day, her scientific papers are kept in lead-lined boxes. Researchers who want to read them have to wear radiation suits. Those of us who know 20th century history know about the dangers of radiation. Who can forget how World War II ended, with nuclear bombs on Japanese cities? But how many Americans can tell you why World War II began? Some of the better educated may know that World War II was triggered by Germany's smoldering resentments at the punitive reparations inflicted upon them after the humiliating defeat of World War I, but that leads to another question. Why did World War I occur? World War I began in Austria-Hungary, that great power which, along with Russia and Prussia, had divided Marie Curie's homeland of Poland into three parts. All Europe had concentrated on maintaining the balance of power since 1815, when Napoleon was defeated, but new developments in Europe were steadily altering that balance. Austria's trouble started with the unification of Italy, which deprived Austria's Habsburg rulers of the Italian territories of Sardinia, Lombardy, Parma, and Tuscany in 1859. That reduced Austria's size and increased Austria's problems. The new unified Italy wanted more Austrian territory, like Venice. Things got worse when Austria got tricked into fighting for territory to the north, near Denmark. Prussia's political and military genius, Otto von Bismarck, used that incident to engineer a swift little war that dramatically increased Prussia's power at Austria's expense. Austria lost face and lost more land. Prussia rewarded its ally Italy with the coveted prize of Venice. Prussia's new prominence enabled it to unify most of the other German-speaking states. Bismarck triggered one more war, with France this time, and took Paris. Bismarck's victorious king, Wilhelm I, was crowned as Kaiser Wilhelm I, Emperor of the German Reich, or Empire. All of this was bad for Austria, which depended on its prestige as the leader of the German-speaking world to keep control of all its other ethnic subjects. If Austria couldn't lead the German-speaking states anymore, why should it control the Hungarians, Serbs, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Croats, and other nationalities? The strongest of these ethnic groups were the Magyars of Hungary, who had begun to demand their independence. But the Magyar leaders knew an independent Hungary would be a little country between two great powers, Austria and Russia, a lamb between two lions. So they asked for a dual monarchy instead, with Franz Joseph of Austria wearing two crowns, Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary. Franz Joseph agreed, and the Austrian Empire became Austria-Hungary. Rhetoric students will look at Austria-Hungary one more time next week, in the context of the international tensions that eventually led to armed conflict and the tangle of alliances that turned that conflict into the First World War. As Austria-Hungary lost power, Germany gained it, both in Europe and abroad. Germany took on colonies in Africa, in what is now Togo, Tanzania, Cameroon, and Namibia. It was the age of imperialism, after all. So America finally decided to get in on the act. It started with Hawaii. Hawaiians first met Europeans when Captain Cook sailed up to the islands in 1778. The islands were as close to Eden as anywhere on Earth. The Hawaiian people had mastered irrigation and had farming techniques so advanced that food was plentiful. Far away from other humans, they rarely suffered from contagious diseases and never had to fear a foreign attack. Way back in Tapestry Year 1, we noted that civilizations tend to arise when there's a stable food supply, strong central government, and security from outside enemies. Hawaii had both food and safety and developed a monarchy. A rich Hawaiian culture emerged, complete with music, dancing, art, and poetry. Things changed after white men came. New diseases ravaged the islands. The kings of different islands fought each other. There were good changes. Christian missionaries brought the gospel of God's Son who gave his life for sinners and ended Hawaii's ritual human sacrifices. That was good, but the missionaries also imposed their European culture on the naked savages. Some who came as poor missionaries found ways to get rich in Hawaii, which is why native Hawaiians say the Protestants came to the islands to do good, and they did right well. The island paradise was the perfect place to grow pineapples, an exotic fruit with a wonderful ability to stay good for months in a cargo bay. Pineapples arrived in Hawaii in 1813, and American James Dole founded his pineapple company there in 1851. As business boomed, the United States took an interest in these distant islands. By this time, Hawaii was a Christian kingdom, which became a constitutional monarchy in 1887 when white settlers persuaded the king to adopt a constitution. But American businessmen wanted more. In 1894, some Americans joined a coup that overthrew Queen Liliuokalani. They formed a republic and elected a Hawaiian-born American as president. The new government hoped the United States would promptly annex Hawaii. Grover Cleveland wanted nothing to do with that and turned them down, but after the Republicans won the elections of 1896, the situation changed. In 1898, President McKinley annexed Hawaii, which became a territory of the United States. Hawaii got as close to paradise as Earth is likely to get. A Christian king ruled tropical islands far from any neighbors who could threaten his people. But the world was getting smaller every day. We don't know what fruit it was that tempted Adam and Eve to disobey the Lord and lose their place in Eden. Most people say it was an apple. Who knows, though? Maybe they were tempted by the same fruit that ended Liliuokalani's reign, the pineapple.